In this course, we're going to be using a web development framework called FastAPI. Just to recap, web frameworks are tools to handle and automate standard tasks when we're building our web application, and that's things like session management, templating, database access, and lots more. Now, some frameworks are very opinionated, others are more what are known as micro frameworks and provide you with more flexibility. When it comes to Python, the most popular web frameworks are Flask and Django. There are many others. Some people really love Pyramid, Bottle, Sanic, the list goes on, but Flask and Django do tend to dominate, particularly in industry. For example, Instagram runs on Django. And both Flask and Django have been around for more than a decade at least. FastAPI is much newer, as you can see from the table here, but it's rapidly gaining momentum, and there are very good reasons for this. So the key features of FastAPI. First of all, it's fast because it leverages Python's async I/O capabilities. So the async I/O module was introduced in Python 3.4 and was one of the biggest changes to the Python language in its history. And I'll provide further reading in the lecture notes if you're interested in learning more about that. But what it means for our purposes here is that we can get very significant performance out of FastAPI comparable to what we'd get with Node.js or Golang. Second, FastAPI works with type hints introduced in Python 3.6 and Pydantic to provide us with a lot of validation and automation out of the box, which saves us time, reduces bugs, and generally makes us more productive when we're working with this framework. FastAPI has automatic documentation because it works with the OpenAPI standard, and that's baked into it. So just out of the box, by writing our endpoints, we're also simultaneously creating documentation, which is really powerful, and we're going to be leveraging that throughout this course. A bit more of an advanced topic, so FastAPI has some really brilliant dependency injection. And although going into the details of this is beyond this course, suffice it to say, this was what really sold me on FastAPI. I've spent a lot of time grappling with doing dependency injection in Flask and haven't been satisfied. FastAPI does it really elegantly. And in the lecture notes, I'll link to a few blog posts if you're interested in learning more about that. I've been using FastAPI in production for a year now, and I think it is the future of web development in Python. I think if you're starting a new project, FastAPI is a great choice, unless you are going to do a lot of templating or build a CMS, in which case I'd stick with Django. But for building APIs for things like machine learning, FastAPI is a great choice. Also worth noting that the documentation for FastAPI is excellent, really detailed and easy to follow along with. What I'm going to do now is just walk you through a very basic FastAPI example to give you some foundation and to show some of the features that I just went over. And then over the course of this section, we're going to be building out a much more realistic example. So I'm here, I have a single main py file, and this code here is our minimum viable FastAPI, so 8 lines of code. And you can see that we import this FastAPI class, we use it to instantiate an app, and then we have this decorator syntax to define an endpoint in our API. And we then have a function, and what this function returns is going to be the response when we hit this endpoint. So I'm going to do that now. So I will start the server. And I'll go over what Unicorn is and what's happening here later on in the section, so don't worry if that's not familiar. Going to navigate to localhost 8000. And here we have our hello world as expected. So this just matches the response here from the root endpoint. Next up, let's look at this square endpoint where we're going to square a number. And here again, FastAPI makes use of Python's existing functionality. So I define the function which corresponds to this endpoint, and this number here is going to be a parameter for this endpoint. So it expects a number, and it's going to square that number and return the result. If I therefore go to square, and number equals, let's say 2, we get back the response squared is 4. Let's change this to say 3. and you can see each time we're getting back the square of the number. Now, so parameters correspond to the arguments passed to our function, and crucially, the fact that we're specifying the type of this argument also provides automatic validation for any of these values. So if I were to pass a string instead of an integer, I'm going to get a validation error because the value is not a valid integer. So this just comes out of the box with FastAPI, and this is what we mean by the framework working alongside Python type hints in order to provide us with this functionality, which in other frameworks you'd have to write manually yourself. Same thing applies if we provide a float instead of an integer, same problem. And of course in this case we're just working with something quite simple, but as we'll see in this section, when we start to bring in things like pydantic schemas, then we can also apply the same sort of validation, which when we've got complex inputs like we do for our model, is going to provide us with a lot of value and automatic validation. We also get documentation just out of the box here. If I go to the docs endpoint, which is the default, then you get this, what's known as Swagger documentation. So here's our square endpoint, and tells us what the expected query parameters are and what a successful response looks like. And we can actually try it out and just run things here in the browser. So let's add 3 and go execute, and we can see here's the response. So all this we get for free just by using FastAPI, and as we'll see as we go through the section, this is just scratching the surface of its capability. So this is our web framework of choice, and in the next lecture we'll look at our machine learning API.